Welcome to The First Turn. I'm your host, Hyena, and today, Llama and I are talking about This Week in Warhammer. If you like what you hear, give us a like, comment, subscribe, or share, or let us know if there's something you'd like to hear us talk about. Alright, let's get to it.
But welcome to The First Turn. I'm Hyena.
I'm Llama.
And today we are, we're a few hours into some hanging out. So we're
hanging out. Yep.
You know, we're thick in it. Call it.
Pre-nap phase.
Pre-nap, post
quench.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
We ourselves were sponging.
So there's a few. I'm soaking it up. There's a few things that we can talk about today. I mean, on the actual Warhammer side of things, it's a bit light. I mean, we've got news of armies releasing
Death Guard, World Eaters.
Both Death Guard and World Eaters coming out, which goes to tell you that they don't get much,
mm-hmm.
right? When you can put two armies in the same release window, you're not getting.
They're
right?
getting character in a book.
Yeah.
I do love the look of that. What's his name? Slaughterbound, the World Eaters hero.
Yeah.
Big hulking version of the Exalted 8-bound guy. And I saw on his data sheet, he has keyword demon even.
I think the normal Exalted do as well.
Yeah,
the regular 8-bound, I think, do not.
You're right.
It's something like
I
that.
think, and I know they've got like possessed keyword or whatever that is.
Okay.
But I think his story is supposed to be that he's like basically a not demon prince vessel for a demon kind of deal. Murder machine model looks super sweet. I don't know how good he'll be in game because I don't keep up enough with that.
I mean,
but
any kind of hero that can join to that unit, no matter what they give them, will probably be all right.
I think both units in some form are seeing play.
Yeah.
But
I mean, hell, even the new sort of rearrangement, call it, of the Khorne Berserkers sounds pretty good to me.
Yep.
Depending on points, obviously.
The first boohoos I heard up front were like, oh, all these Khorne units lost a point of strength, but then you looked at the rules for the detachments and for the heroes, and it was like, no, they didn't. They all still have strength.
It's all there. It's just conditional now.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have it baked into your data sheet. You just have it through auras and buffs and blood tithes and charging and detachment rules.
The berserkers being able to go from 10 max to 20 in a unit.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
Could be huge. I mean, one of the things in 40K they've always tried to be cautious of in recent years is how multiplicative a stratagem can be when it's applied to these big blobby units. And now they went the opposite direction here. And now the Zerkers can be 20. So now any stratagem that buffs something on that unit, that's pretty heavy.
Like stratagem stacked with an artifact, stacked with a buff, stacked with a
character attached to them.
Character attached, stacked with all this stuff. Like you have a compounding power level, right? Like it stacks multiplicatively.
Yeah. And
you get bigger benefits with the more models you have in the unit.
And for World Eaters, I guess the players will tell us more over time, but it's that's what you picture is like piles of rampaging lunatics.
Yep.
There's not much to say. All the rules have been showing up on Warcom. I think the Codex is maybe leaked out somewhere.
I've seen some stuff, but no, I can't say I've seen it all, but I've seen a few things. I mean, the embargo should be lifting, I think, this weekend kind of thing about information for it. So I'm sure there are review channels out there that have spoiled the entire Codex. If you look hard enough, you could probably find something, but I mean, like with every one of these books, any changes are seen as this like catastrophic derailment of the function of the army.
Right.
Right? Like that's just, it doesn't function anymore. They've got this one change to an army rule or this data sheet. Now it's no good, doesn't work. But then we see, within days, even weeks of the book releasing or whatever, like people calm down and they actually analyze it and actually try it out and they're like, oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah.
They don't admit that was an overreaction, but they'll say, actually, this army is good.
Well, then they don't admit.
It happened with Emperor's Children. They seemed like, they're kind of weak. The guys don't have an in-ball. No, they're,
Yep.
Then it's all of a sudden it's like, oh, no,
they perform very well.
They're doing just fine.
Yeah. And because it turns out, by the way, movement shenanigans, moving really fast and being good at objectives and it turns out in 40K that's relevant. It's not only the overreaction to anything changing and them not owning it later when they were proven incorrect or proven that the only thing they needed to do was maybe reevaluate a tactic or a unit. There's also, it's funny because those same people were hyping it so much. Man, we need a book. We need a book. We need a book. We need a book. We got a book. Oh man, it's different than what we had in the index. Nerf. It wasn't a nerf. But anyway, I'm sure we'll hear some of that with World Eaters and Death Guard. They'll be fine. We know this is kind of a year of chaos in 40K. They're getting all their stuff. I
did think it was really funny. I saw someone, one of the social medias post something that was like, "Oh, the year of chaos, huh?" And then they showed off the one release that wasn't chaos, and that was like Space Marine drop pods. I thought this was the year of chaos. And it's like one single release for one army that isn't chaos doesn't negate the fact that it's the year of chaos.
Right.
Like, I thought that was such, again, an overreaction to something where it's like, you think you were clever? Do you think this this one event negates everything? It's like, no.
I bet that post got a lot of likes, though.
Yeah. It's like, cool. Did they have drop pods before? Yes.
Yes.
What did they actually get? A resculpt of the existing drop pods with almost no rule change? Maybe a few rule changes. Because we don't know the rules for the drop pods just yet.
Right. They did say
a new data sheet, but it was
sheet,
like the rumors were it's going to be a terrain piece instead of a vehicle, which has all kinds of implications.
Correct.
Plus, like, hey, remember how you could just take drop pods and they'd have guns? No, not anymore. So it's like, even if you had like an area denial, vehicle, stationary vehicle near an objective with a small shooting attack, even that aspect of it is gone because you can deploy near terrain that isn't considered a vehicle anymore. It can't block out deep strikes from the opponents and movements and stuff. So it's like, really, you're mad that new drop pods weren't for chaos, and so that negates the year of chaos. It's like,
so in the year of chaos, your idea of the year of chaos was no other army,
right?
No other game was supposed to get anything.
Yeah, year of chaos to me means like, oh, we're going to focus on chaos,
or at least going to touch them all.
And it's like we're getting that. Right?
Yes.
Chaos Knights are coming up soon. We've got
Thousand Suns are coming too.
All 4 of the March Chaos books are coming out. Like
Demons got their own detachment, by the way.
Seems like it to me.
Yeah, they got a lot. And now the new drop pod thing's interesting. I had almost forgotten about that. I obviously don't know what to think much of it yet until we see the final data sheet for it. But I do like that it's like, no, we're making this now a fixed footprint for rules purposes, for rules cleanliness, I should say.
Yeah.
Because before it was like, well, you could do the flaps up or the flaps down, but then it had this weird interaction where stuff couldn't be within.
Well, then it was crazy too, because you could not glue the hinges.
Yep.
And depending on how you needed to place it that game, you could flip the hinges up, and it would just not have a footprint beyond the hex that it had.
So you could fit it where it shouldn't.
So you could fit it where it shouldn't be. Or it's like, I want it to take up a lot of space. Drop the you shouldn't be able to convert the model on the fly to take up more or less space.
No,
that's insane to me. So with this new drop pod, they've actually cut off the top third of the petals of the flaps that disgorge the soldiers, and they have sculpted it into a rocky base.
Yep.
So the model will have a base size essentially now, instead of being it can be as big as you want it based on how many petals are down.
And I guess people could argue, oh, this takes something out of the hands of the players. It's like, no, what it does is it avoids inconsistency.
Right.
Lack of clarity is eliminated.
Right.
And
now, if they had the drop pod before and they said, hey, always measure to the main base, the hull of the drop pod, no matter how many flaps are down, for clarification purposes of measurement, or if they put the drop pod on a base, like a circle base, and said measure from base to base,
right,
and then if you have flaps down or not, it doesn't matter, you're still measuring to the base.
Well, and
for
that's
everything.
And I think that is adjacent to a problem we've had with the 40K side rules, is the fact that they do the literal size and shape of the model for stuff.
Right.
Just leads to moments like this where now they have to make a hard decision, and what they should have done is just what AoS does, which is you measure to and from the bases no matter what.
Right.
Fixes everything.
Every vehicle now has a base.
Right.
No longer do you have vehicles that are on floating flying stands or on no bases at all, and you measure the hulls. Fuck that.
Yeah, and you can see antennas around corners,
get rid of hull
and
measurements. Get rid of all this crap. You have a cylinder or a physical 3-dimensional space that you take up, which is the model's height times the size of the base. That's your visible footprint, right? 3-dimensional footprint that can be seen, right? That's how it should be. And so it's okay, well, if you got a wing standing up or something, it doesn't count.
Yeah, then
normalize
the hobbyist can model it however they want, because the model has a fixed measurement no matter who's playing it, no matter what it looks like.
Right. I had an argument back in like 6th or 7th edition, which are very similar editions of 40K, about visibility to models behind my Riptide. Because they're big, tall, oval-based models, and there were units behind them that were blocked by... Some of the models were blocked by the legs, and some weren't. And so I said, okay, my opponent was claiming that the model that was like looking straight at the Riptide could see a model behind him directly through the leg. And because the legs in the current configuration and current like angle of the model didn't block any of the model behind it, there was no cover. I'm like, but my base is blocked by this other model's base relative to your model's base.
Yeah. I
should have cover here through this model, right? Depending on where you look behind your model's, quote, eyes, some of these angles do have cover for these guys. Like, so it's like, so I should have just modeled my Riptides sitting down cross-legged so I could block line of sight to the models behind them. This is an absurd argument.
It is absurd because also, like, if you're talking about being literal here, the models obviously don't stand in the same pose for the duration of a battle.
Right.
They're supposed to be simulated walking, jumping.
Right. Or look at models that are on a base that's too big for them. Or like on a circle instead of an oval.
Yep.
Right? Like a lot of biker units will fit on the oval, and they fill those up pretty good. But there are some like cavalry units that are on circles, and there's just wasted space to the sides. They're like, well, why is it on that base? Well, this is to simulate, this is the area of control of this model.
Correct.
Right? It's moving around, and as it's running around and whatever, it's taking up about this much space on the table.
It's a rules footprint.
And so things can't enter that space because this model's using that space as it's moving around. That makes sense to me, right? Like that part of it makes sense. But like literally Magnus standing here with his gigantic wings sticking up in the air and his staff raised, and it's like you can see to the tips of his wings and the tip of his staff, and you have line of sight on him because of that. It's like, that's absurd.
It is.
So I would love to see that in this like age of rules cleanup. That kind of thing gets normalized. That would be nice.
And the funny thing is, like, the first reaction, of course, is always a -1. People would say you're dumbing down 40K. And it's like, well, no. Age of Sigmar got this right by avoiding the hobby side for rules purposes and saying you just measure to and from bases.
Right.
You draw lines to and from bases.
And because there's so little verticality in that game, the idea of like true line of sight doesn't matter that much.
No.
So
yeah,
I mean, fantasy was like that. There was no verticality in fantasy. There
was virtually no terrain in fantasy.
Forests that were represented by flat puddles. And
in 40K, it's like, I know there's always going to be the hobby element, or the dare I say, you're going to have the old timers who always want to imagine this fight happening in a great big city, and that's great. But like, you have to think about what makes rules cleaner, and if you just learn to ignore the three-dimensional aspects of the hobby and think about bases and the footprint they represent, you could eliminate so many questions.
Or fully embrace the 3D aspect of it and write rules that make it work for that.
Yeah.
And part of that involves your base size should determine the height.
That's exactly what I mean.
I mean, look at like Infinity.
Yeah.
Right? Like Infinity has different base sizes, and it isn't necessarily based on your, like the cylinder you take up isn't necessarily based on the base that you're on. There are like large base short model. You're like little robots and stuff, right? That are like shorter than a person, but 3 times as wide as a person. They have a different silhouette number than like a tag would. It's on the same size base, but they specify that. And so it's like when you go to measure that and see if you can see something, there's literally a rectangular silhouette that you can put behind the model that says, this is the space I take up, regardless of what I've done with the model. With this unit, this is the silhouette of the model from any angle. Something like that could work for this. If you're on a large oval base, like a knight-sized base, even if you have a knight like waving its arms like crazy, it should have a set height, it should have a set width, it should have a set everything.
So in a way they could do that is like right now they try to put a keyword on specific things where it'll say like Titanic or whatever.
Yeah.
But what they could do, I think, is you have maybe another box and it would have 2 categories. It would say what its base size is,
and the height,
and then you list a height category that says like short, medium, large, G for gargantuan or whatever, and you could have those categories, and the rules would define what those mean.
Right.
And now you're done with that.
Yeah.
And now you don't have questions.
And then if you use the base as like your vertical or your horizontal limits of your vertical cylinder, whatever, then you don't have to worry about doing a silhouette. You can say, well, you're this tall no matter what.
Yep.
So if you've got flags or you've got like trophies on top, like those don't count against you.
Yeah, you shouldn't have the creative conversion hobbyist punished, and you shouldn't have other people who model for advantage.
Right. Because like if I want to do a Flyrant, back in the old edition. The Flyrant model is like standing on his tail like a kangaroo with these gigantic wings. But I could have modeled him to be like standing on foot with the non-Flyrant legs, and then the wings from a different kit where it's like they're tucked back.
Well, just like the Tyranid Primer, they're folded in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, well, this is a Flyrant. He's just not currently in fly mode how I've modeled him. My Flyrant now can hide.
Much easier.
It still counts as flying, you know, but I can control the angles of attack now better from my perspective and with my advantage.
And that the hobby should not be a part of that, right? Exactly. And that's
right.
Those are separate elements. And 40K is really the biggest game where this is still an issue.
Yeah, agreed. So there's room for improvement there. But how cool was it to see that like the changes to Khorne Berserkers getting all these like huge buffs and stuff from specific characters, and like having massive changes and massive effects in the game based on, you know, what characters nearby. Like that's pretty cool. I think it makes that unit viable now.
It does,
because we were talking about them not really being viable in the units at the sizes that they were, but now they are. I mean that just goes to show you how AoS has really kind of like they've taken the opposite approach, because that is a massive change you make to a unit.
It is.
By having a character that gives you like 4 or 5 stat buffs for being near you, plus like an army rule that benefits. Like there's tons of stuff that change that unit. AoS, they've gone the opposite way. It's like there's very simple synergies. There's very simple special rules for units now. There's very minor benefits to army rules. Like they've done a really weird direction with AoS. You know, Battletomes don't really improve the army above index. In fact, like we saw, it kind of like
we talked about last week.
It doesn't like it almost makes them worse every single time a Battletome comes out. At the very least, they are the same. At the best, you get a new unit or two.
Yep.
And then,
but then that's not. But that's not even necessarily. That doesn't even necessarily mean they made the army better. They just made something completely new.
Right. So you have nothing to compare it to.
No.
So something is always better than nothing.
But I see what you're saying is like so. There's an element to the way the rules play in AoS that I think is possibly the cleanest rules they've got. But where I'll agree with you is like you end up with a little bit of envy as a predominantly AoS player when you look at like, well, my character has one rule and it's
nothing.
I can bring a unit with me to fight.
Right.
And then you look at 40K and it's like, well, this unit's okay, but in this detachment, they get 1 billion stat buffs. And then if I have this one dirt cheap character attached to them, so not even just standing to them, attached so he can't even be picked out, now they get plus to strength and plus to movement and plus to whatever and rerolls on things. And it's like, and holy crap.
Warlord, so he's got this trait that affects them. And then he's got an artifact that gives him another benefit that applies to a unit, not just once per game. Like a lot of artifacts happen in AoS. It's a once per game. You get to fight first. It's like, who gives a shit about that? You know, it's such a small benefit that you get to use your one artifact slot in the army for a once per game, do one thing on this character only.
Yeah.
It's just like, man, there's nothing exciting about that, you know? So, I don't know. I still think it's the cleanest game so far. I really do. The balance,
that's
the
what I mean,
is there.
the overall rules play and how to understand the progression of the rules. It's clean.
But is it clean through the virtue of it being stripped down and simple?
Vanilla.
I think that's what it is right now. I mean, I think that's why people like Spearhead so much. It's because a lot of that balance that comes from having things that have flavor is kind of brought back a little bit into Spearhead. And they balance them around the fact that they compete against one another, not like player-created lists balancing against one another, right? So, like, for example, here's an example. Seraphim, I think, are overtuned in their army rules. I've said this before. There was a tournament that came out recently where it was like 3 out of the 4 top 4 spots were Seraphim. Now, they weren't the ground-based bite-your-face-off Seraphim units that I'm complaining about because that kind of a unit dominates us on a small scale. Lord Croak and Slans and like that sort of aspect are too good. They affect the game too much at 2,000 point, and their army rules are so blanketed and overreaching that it's like this. Nothing compares to the army rules of a Seraphim army in terms of power level. It's crazy how good they are.
And by the way,
read them.
They don't have a Battletome yet. They're just
good.
index. Yeah.
Their piece of terrain is by far the most
impactful
and like effective and almost like oppressive terrain piece in the game. It's ridiculous. It's so good. So I mean, it's pretty similar to like the Bone Reaper one in terms of like I can do the thing every turn. Because like we were laughing about how bad the Slaves of Darkness one is because it's like a third the effectiveness. Less than. It's a quarter of the effectiveness.
Yeah, the Realm Shaper engine,
Yeah.
first of all, is 15 health.
Yep. Man, that's healthy.
It has a 4-up save.
Yep.
Which is whatever. But so the thing I've noticed also in games is people rarely ever attack that piece of faction trade. You just can't spend your resources on it.
Right.
But
With such a massive range.
so its passive
Yep.
is add 1 to hit rolls for Saurus and Kroxigor units that are within 9 of this terrain feature. Blanket buff to 2 units you're playing boatloads of.
So if they're defending it, they just get +1 to hit.
And then
all
in
the
your
time.
hero phase, if there are any friendly Seraphim wizards within 3 of this terrain feature, pick another terrain feature within 24, which for those of you who are unfamiliar, a 2,000 point board in AoS is the same size as a 40k board, but the game all happens inside of 24 inches. It really does.
Yeah.
So pick
and not wholly within 24.
Now,
just within 24.
Pick another terrain feature within 24. Then pick up to 3 enemy units within 3 inches of that terrain feature.
Only enemies are targeted by it within 3 of that terrain feature. So that's also it's already a massive
and not
area.
Wholly.
So you could have like the tip of a terrain feature is just touching your 24-inch range. It extends 4 or 5 inches, and then another 3 inches beyond that.
One model from a unit could be there.
Yeah.
Toe in.
Yeah.
D3 for each target on a 2+ inflicted amount of mortal damage equal to the roll. If the terrain feature has a health characteristic, it also takes D3 mortal damage.
Yeah.
So you get every hero phase you get a free, don't need to cast it, smite on 3 units.
Yep.
From your terrain feature, which is also buffing your Saurus and Kroxigors.
Which is an average of, 27, 28 inches away? If you can target something at max range.
Yep.
Units 27 inches away are taking D3 mortal wounds, 3 of them, up to 3. It's insane.
By the way, it's free.
It's free. As opposed to the Slaves of Darkness one, which has to charge up to 12... Was it 9 or 12 points?
Yeah.
So you roll d6 a turn, and you add that many points to the charge level of the terrain piece. Once you've got enough points to cast your version of Smite, you select a terrain feature within, I think, 18 instead of 24, and then every unit within 1 inch of that terrain feature, friend and foe, you roll a dice for every model in those units.
It is 24.
Oh, it's 24. Okay.
And you do pick enemies within 3, but you have to first have 9 power points.
No, it's friends too, isn't it?
It says any number of enemy units.
Oh, I thought it targeted friends too. Makes it better. But the effect is roll a dice for every model in the unit or within range.
The unit, yeah. It's
Read
if
it
this
to me.
terrain feature has 9 or more power, you pick an objective or terrain feature within 24.
Mm-hmm.
Then pick any number of enemy units within 3 to be the target. You remove the 9 power points and then roll a d3 for each enemy unit. On a 2-up, they take that mortal damage.
Okay. But it takes 3 turns to charge up 9 points, basically. So you can do the same thing that the Seraphim tower can do, but one every 3 of your turns, which means you, unless you roll good, you're doing it 2 times per game.
Yeah,
they do it 5 times.
The earliest you're doing that is turn 2,
Yep.
because in your hero phase you draw power.
Yep.
Yeah, and then to get a +1 to a casting roll, you have to also. So that's just it. You can't even do multiple things, whereas the Lizard Man, the Seraphim one, does 2 things for free.
Yep. It's insane.
Oh, and damage. So.
Yep. It's just like they're basically the same thing, but they're vastly different power levels.
Yep. Both free.
Yeah.
By the way.
Both free. Same thing with endless spells. Universal endless spells better than any army's endless spells.
Yep. All free.
It's crazy. But yeah, so like besides that kind of thing, like there are just army rule differences between the armies that are not balanced. There was an example I wanted to bring up with one of the detachments.
But overall, you think Seraphim currently, I mean, they're not winning everything, but
they're overtuned.
They are now showing up a lot at the
much.
top.
They get too much.
Yeah.
Because their other thing is like the constellations where they just get a blanket buff for the army. And if you do a thing during the battle, which is usually easy to accomplish, you get a second one. This army-wide just 2 buffs. It's crazy. Whereas most armies that have a Battletome now, there's a very focused thing you're trying to do with your list, and the benefit you get from taking a specific detachment is like minor.
Yeah.
You know, and so I don't think Slaves of Darkness are in a very good spot. I think Seraphim are a very, very good spot in terms of army rules.
I certainly think those like the win rates show they're similar, but whenever I see them play each other, it's funny. Yeah. You look at the results and it'll be like, well, the Seraphim player played 5 rounds. He beat 2 Slaves to Darkness players. This Slaves to Darkness player who got 3rd played a Seraphim, and that was his loss.
Yeah.
It feels like that is particularly just a horrible matchup.
Yeah. Well, because like the lizards are hard to kill, and then in addition to that, I mean, if you look at their rule for like the ground lizard, right? The ones that are like living instead of memories. Because there's like two kinds. There's the starbound and there's the coalesced.
There's the demons and the feral.
Even like in a smaller game, it doesn't scale. We talked about that scalability of army rules and how they're oppressive. Some of them are oppressive at low point values, and some of them are like non-impactful at high levels.
Well, the best slaves units you can't even play at low points levels. Right. They're too expensive.
Yep, that hurts.
Yeah. But
like the Seraphim one with the coalesce kind of things is you just pile in and bite on 3 units. It's insane. That's so good. It's a ton of mortal wounds. Well, I'll tell you this. The new book for Soulblight Gravelords has a very similar thing that they can do, where it's like choose 3 units, they pile in, roll a d3 for every unit, or for 3 enemy units. On a 2-up, they take that many mortal wounds. They have the same exact kind of rule, but it's for Deadwalk, which are your zombies, your fell bats,
which do nothing,
your what else? Deadwalk, not much. The shittiest units in your army can pile in and do some mortal damage. Whereas, like, the best units in your army, in the Seraphim one, do all the things they do, but also pile in and do mortal damage. That's the difference. Is the bites for Seraphim are so much more impactful because they happen on durable, high health, lethal, hard-hitting lethal units.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas, like, who gives a crap if my zombies can pile in and bite?
That's, by the way, the only damage the zombies are going to do.
You have to take a specific detachment, basically, in order to pull that off. You have to give up all the other stuff. You can't focus on doing your vampire stuff. You can't focus on doing any of your death rattle stuff. You have to go zombie-focused to do this. And it is garbage. Yeah, it's just like, that's... But it's fair when the zombies do it. It's not fair when Croxagores do it.
Right, who already are really good.
Right.
Yeah.
So, or any of your heroes that go along with them, because they're all Seraphim, like Lizardman unit, warrior unit, whatever you want to call them. Like they all, Saurus units, there you go. They all can do it. So you could have like a duel between characters and have your, Saurus characters all just pile in and kill, and just don't even focus any of your attacks on an enemy hero and just kill them instantly at the end of combat. That's ridiculous. So power level differences. There's some balance issues. There's some simplified rules.
You were originally like comparing that to the fact of like what impact a hero in 40K can have on his friendly units.
Absolutely.
Compared to what they're doing.
Yeah.
Now,
lots of they are
different. They are different games.
Yeah.
But I will say they're being somewhat consistent on that in AoS. For every army that gets an update, it's like vanilla characters have minimal impact.
Yeah.
So
it
feels like we gripe week after week.
And it's that in addition to like every single time a new book comes out, we lose stuff for every army. And so it does feel bad. And we do gripe a little bit, but it's like part of it's growing pains, part of it's making room so the armies can grow. We just haven't seen the growth. If/when updates happen to armies that replace some of these gaps that are being created by all these cuts of like units being sent to Legends, units
or to Old World, or
because they were reported over from Fantasy. They're finally getting rid of those kits now 9 years later.
That's right, everybody. Later this year will be the 9th anniversary of Age of Sigmar.
Yeah. So they are starting to do some of that, right?
Yeah.
Zombie Dragon getting cut as a unit.
Yep.
Now we've got the Necrolith, whatever. It's not a direct replacement, but you could absolutely still use your old Bone Dragon as it.
Yeah, no one's going to fight you on
that.
Well, one thing that I think you and I talked about before we came on air was so the AoS armies this year, with the exception of Slaves to Darkness, have gotten significant model releases. The problem is it was model releases that were previewed to us months and months prior. Yeah. And so this was just a fulfillment, like a finally of what we were told was coming. But we don't have a big preview of what's coming next. We only have cryptic images.
Well, we didn't get anything from Adepticon.
And Adepticon didn't give us much.
Adepticon showed you, General's Handbook's coming. It's like, we knew that already. Why'd you need to confirm that? Like it happens every year. It happens the same time every year.
Yeah.
Why was that a big reveal? Why was that the reveal you showed? Why didn't you show me a single model? We know...
heck, do a teaser video of some faction coming out.
We know the ghosts are coming. We know...
Yep. But that, again, that's not new information.
Right. It's not new.
No.
Right. But we didn't even see anything from them, which was insane to me.
No.
So it's like, all right, well, we're still in, a holding pattern.
Yes.
While we're waiting for something else to be shown. But it's like, 40K, here's 5 armies we're going to show you something for. AoS, you got a new season coming.
Yep.
Are you kidding me? Like, that's it? Come on. put a little more attention into your second biggest game.
Your second biggest game,
right? I'm tired of seeing stuff for Horus Heresy and for Middle Earth.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, come on, who is that for? What 12 people are you really exciting with this?
And the sheer amount of production space that they're using, especially for Horus Heresy.
Yeah.
So many kits that are plastic coming out, which again, good for them. But like, this is eating up everything.
Mm-hmm.
We know the production capabilities aren't massive yet. And so it's like, oh, wow. So this is like this year, you've done what? 27 new kits for Horus Heresy? So...
I mean, that might be underestimating.
So how much space do you really have for new AoS and 40K releases, really?
Right.
Oh, Middle Earth's all being ported to plastic.
Oh, and by
plus
the way,
new stuff.
Space Wolves just gets shoved in there in the middle to bump everything back.
Yep. Wasn't on the roadmap originally.
No.
Now, don't get me wrong. They look great.
Yep.
But it was just, shoehorned in. By the way, Space Wolves are going to get a massive, possibly 2-part release. Yeah.
And we don't have a date on the rest of the Soulblight release. We don't have a book date.
Nope.
We don't have a pre-order window. Maybe we'll see it tomorrow, being Sunday, the 27th. Maybe we'll get like 3 weeks from now the rest of Soulblight, which is basically 2 model kit: the vampire on horse character, and then the
Prince Fordry.
Prince Fordry.
Yeah.
Those 2 kits are still yet to come, and they'll be alongside the book when the book becomes officially legal. Because this pretty book I've got for Soulblight isn't activatable in the app yet, by the way.
Nope.
So there's also that. I don't know. It just seems like massive oversight though for their second game. It's just put a little more attention there. Give us regular updates on stuff the way you're doing for everything else.
I know it's easy in this age of instant gratification to be impatient, but it was.
But I'm waiting months.
Well, that's just it. What I was going to say is they gave us a great build up to and launch of AoS 4.0,
Yep.
and ever since then it's been like.
And then.
Yeah, then it's been like, oh, by the way, here's the thing. All right, here's 6 40K armies that are going to get attention between your 2 AoS things.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, here's another 30 releases for Horus Heresy.
And we kind of lump the Horus Heresy together, right? It's not just the 28 mil scale Horus Heresy.
No, it's also Legions Imperialis,
which they get tons and tons.
Because they're
of
Heresy
there.
Thursday on Warhammer Community, which now doesn't happen on Thursdays, but they still call it Heresy Thursdays. But they've been getting so much attention, so much of their production space. So they're either sitting on just CADs and stockpiles of AoS stuff coming, ...
Yeah.
But speaking of ... that makes me think of some painting techniques.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Because ever since I've been remaking my hobby space, which it's funny is the smaller the items I have now to move and prepare for the new space, the longer this takes.
Mm-hmm.
All the big stuff, moving desks, purging.
Well, because the little stuff's got to go in very particular orientations and very, very particular spots.
And you got to find homes for it. Or it's stuff that you didn't realize it's like, oh, these are technically bits. I don't have a bit bin for that yet. Moving individual models, moving individual frames, moving individual tools, moving individual paints. But I've seen a really neat trend. I know Trovarian was someone who really gave it eyeballs. And people have been coming up with this way of painting their miniatures with using a makeup sponge to do a lot of the heavy lifting.
Makeup tools is not an unknown hobby hack.
It's not.
Right?
I mean, the bag I carry my paints in is a cosmetic bag.
So many of the things we use are cosmetics, right? A lot of our dry brushes we were using before getting Artis Opus stuff,
right.
and AK dry brush and stuff. We're just makeup brushes. I mean, yeah, you said your cosmetic bag you have that holds all your paints is perfect for miniature painting.
Yep.
I mean, so why not use other tools from cosmetics to up our hobby game?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the one we're talking about now is sponging.
Yeah.
Right. Sponging, as we'll call it.
Sponging.
The sponge. There are makeup sponges that are contoured to use on small spaces in eye creases and whatever very controlled ways to apply makeup. That when you think about it, it's well, what is a cheek but just a Terminator shoulder pad?
That's obviously what a human cheek is. Obviously,
I mean? But the similarities are there, right?
Yeah.
You've got the smoothness. You need a consistent gradient.
What is a wrinkly forehead except a Space Marine's cape?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All that kind of thing. And so there's these contour sponges that are basically like little egg-shaped
with a sharp tip at one end.
Flat spots on it that, could absolutely be used to apply acrylic paint to model. And we've seen that as like a hobby tip for creating very quick base coats. Like, this idea of base coating things with unconventional methods has been a thing for a while.
It has.
Right? Like, base coating before has always been like, oh, well, you got to dry brush or you got to airbrush on a primer, and then you very thin, kind of apply your base coat before you start. It's always been that. But when we have like methods like heavy dry brushing, or
the slightly damp or the big fat dry brush with a dampening pad.
Yeah, where you're like stippling on.
You can do a fat stipple. It's like using the large circle tool in MS Paint.
Right.
For those who are older.
Well, this one is one of those tools that replicates that same kind of thing where you're quickly getting paint onto most of the surface.
Yep.
But still, like, it's not as precise of a tool that you can get it into like cracks and stuff where there shouldn't be that color anyway.
Yep.
You can get a very effective, very quick base coat paint job done on models before, stepping in with a finer brush to do detail. And so these brushes are cheap, they're real accessible, they're easy to use, and getting texture and like base coating, and even like you thought that maybe there was even room there for improvement upon.
Yeah, I've been fortunate in that I don't want to say I'm late to the party, but I've seen now enough people who have pretty big audiences who've used these, and some of the advantages are the pores in the makeup style sponges are very fine, which for a miniature is key because the texture will now be micro fine, so it's almost like you're getting micro stippling and base coverage in one fell swoop. And currently, because these companies that make the makeup sponges haven't caught on yet, they're still cheap.
So do you think in a couple years or a few months we'll see like AK come out with a sponge applicator paintbrush tip thing that looks very similar to this that's used for base coating?
Wouldn't be surprised you see those larger hobby supply companies will make them. They'll be smaller. They'll be 4 times more expensive, but probably more precise or more hobby applicable. But it's like in the short term. You have these, they clean up for reuse if you need to, because you're keeping the paint pretty moist, and then you can just rinse it and do it again. But I've seen people do it. People like I said, like Trevelyan. There's another guy who's, I'd love to give a shout out to him, but I forgot his name, who does it with all of his Space Marines, and he has shown off a number of different chapters. Trevelyan did it in a way where he was showing how you could do Grimdark with it, because Grimdark Marines has been his kick. And he has a very effective result where instead of edge highlighting, you do like edge weathering.
So like where the paint's is like chipped off. It's exposed like metal.
Yeah, and then in the crevices, instead of dark lining, he does the opposite, where he puts where calcium and rust and silt would deposit in those areas. Well, he showed how you can still do it with the sponge. And he also did an Eldar Swooping Hawk, where he did one with the airbrush and one with the sponge. Now, the airbrush is still technically quicker if you don't account for like setup and teardown, because you still get a smooth, thin layer really quick. But what was neat with the sponge is you get a pretty smooth, even layer quickly, but it generates a more interesting volume. And by volume, I'm referring to the 3-dimensional plane of light, the zone on a surface that collects light. And so it was like if you're working on like a piece of armor that's like a pectoral spot, well, the airbrush will just coat it all one even thing, including the crevices around it. It'll be one even smooth, and now you have to go in and darken it. And the sponge, it takes you 5 seconds longer than the airbrush, but it was like, well, the darkening's already there because the sponge misses most of the crevice. And then you get also this super fine, interesting micro texture. And so then if you go in and you put a couple of volumes on there, and then you go with another technique, like, say, oil washing, or you grab your contrast paints or your, I guess, speed paints or express paints, whichever version you use, and do a heavy medium on them so that they don't dry so fast. Now you can darken it down, do your panel lining, get your weathering on there in one step. And so I think you're combining, you're doing a better or cleaner version than, say, slap chop.
Right.
So it'll look smoother. And then you're doing your oil wash or your contrast, do your cleanup step. Now you've got weathering, you've got a dramatic look already. And then you can go in later and add any extras you want. Decals, scratches, chips, weathering. And all of a sudden it's like, the biggest thing is like, it's faster, which is convenient. But the biggest thing I think for most hobbyists is it's low effort.
Right. Well, it's like when you tell a new painter what's the proper procedure to paint a model. And the classic method was, well, you prime your model black, you cover the surface completely 100% in a base color. You go through and you wash it, the full surface. You then come back with the original color and reclaim.
Yep.
And then you go in with a higher highlight color and you do your highlights. And you come back with another color and you do some edge highlighting on top of that. And that's without weathering or decals or anything.
And while that's simple,
a lot of steps.
It takes a long time.
It takes a long time to do that. And a lot of it feels waste, right?
Yeah.
To the point where it's like, I think the contrast method has appealed to new painters because it's like, well, now just start with a neutral color and then just put on this contrast over it. Or better than yet, if you're trying to paint like, I don't know, Death Guard, just use a Death Guard green. Your base coat's done then.
Yeah.
You know, now you just need to wash it and highlight. You don't have to do significantly fewer steps than the classic paint method, right? Yep. Now, there are things you lose by not doing the classic paint method. There's depth you miss out on. There's visual interest you miss out on.
Yeah, you're not taking advantage then of as many transparent layers.
Right. But some people don't want to do that. They don't care about that.
They want quick.
I don't want to base coat black and then spend an hour, with dry time. Layering on a color on top of black 3 times.
Multiple times to get it smooth.
So I get a smooth, color. Because like the first time you throw it on there, it's like blotchy and you can see the brush strokes. And you have to do it multiple times to get a solid base color. It takes time. And if you're a new painter just want quick results, it's not the way to do it. It's probably the best technical way to do it. So you learn how paint works. But if you just want your models to get done, there are quicker and more effective ways to do it. For worse results, but I mean, arguably worse results. I've seen people paint and just like screw it up. Doing classical method, paint's too thick. But as an effective way to do it, speed is king, right? And so that's why the slap chop has become popular. That's why the contrast method, and we call that contrast. Any type we said.
Any of those, any of those types. Low surface tension, medium heavy.
They all apply to this. What we're talking about. But this method, again, low effort, easy to use tool because you're not worried about a precise brush, doing anything technical.
And you're doing so little damage to a brush with this because you're saving your brush then for the precision work.
Right.
But I think there's not to spoil anything because I'm working on a project, but like I think there's room to take this baseline and instead of just show the same thing. Let's see what else we can do with it. So I'm interested to try my hand at it. I just got a generic Space Marine Assault Intercessor that was cobbled together from a assortment of random parts, legs, body, chainsword, and pistol, but I just got like a regular Marine backpack, no jump pack. And I'm going to get a primer coat down and I'm going to try some stuff. I haven't decided which chapter yet, but I think there's some tricks we can do to maybe step it up a bit even more. If you want to go for a more vibrant color pattern, then there's some adjustments you need to make to get there. Otherwise, you could do it the way we've seen everybody do it, and then have it be or remain in the grimdark style. But I think there's some things you can do if you want it to be more vibrant. Let's say instead of being so grimdark. Although I think the grimdark's neat. I think you can combine that and then also get vibrancy. Another method I've seen some people try is they will do an entire pre-shading or undercoat grayscale, where they'll do their dark to light and grayscale, and then they go in with inks. So it's essentially the way you do a comic book panel, but in 3 dimension, where you have your artist who draws, the person who then does the ink to create the light and shadow, and then someone comes in with the color. Mm-hmm. And then you can even do that with miniatures. So there's a couple of different things I want to try here that I think won't add to the time, but might be a way to expand your use of these very simple hobby hacks that are becoming so popular.
Right. And once you've mastered them, obviously it gets faster and it gets more effective, and it gets a simple technique in the hands of someone who's painted a long time can produce results better than a newcomer. Right. But that's only through the virtue of weight of experience.
Well, and then you can discover something new even instead of just staying stuck in a thing.
Right. But that just goes to show that even simple techniques still have their uses in high level painting.
Absolutely.
I feel like if I was doing a competition level piece, I may even use some of this textured, very micro textured, smooth base coating methods to get a start.
Yeah, and you could even, it would just be a matter of in between the color jumps, you might moisten the sponge a tad so that it or wick off most of the paint first, and so it'll blend itself out. Right.
So like you're talking about getting like a really nice smooth gradient.
Yeah, I think you could do it
like
even
similar to like an airbrush kind of effect.
I think you could do it with those without it even being without like wet blending. It's like because you can do a gradient with the same color just by the dilution of the paint,
right,
or how much you have loaded.
Well, like if you look at any of the videos by like Artist Opus, where they do dry brushing pretty much exclusively and build up really great color on models. There was one where they did a Space Wolf vehicle. They did like the Fundraising gray sort of blue gray armor panel, and generally with a big flat piece of armor, you don't want to dry brush because it doesn't really benefit you much, because like the traditional benefit of dry brushing was it catches edges.
Yep.
Right? It very quickly highlights and deposits paint on sharp spots. But like in the middle of a big round area, doing that would just build up texture, for the most part. Whereas
or it'll streak.
Or streak, right, and will just ruin the effect. But if you dry brush correctly, you do slowly build up a highlight. And you build up certain spots where a color gains vibrancy. I do agree. I think the sponge method can be used to do a very similar effect to that.
Yep.
Very, very little paint being deposited, but built up slowly over time to build your hot spots. And
because
create a nice smooth
even if you take the same color, you take the same, let's say Mephiston red, and you want it to be predominantly that. Well, you can do a first layer with the sponge, let's say, across most of the miniature. And if it's over black primer, it will be slightly transparent. The black will show through some.
Yeah, it'll be kind of maroon at the end.
Yep. Might even be uneven a little bit. But then you go back a second time. Don't add a highlight color to the Mephiston red. Don't change the dilution. But you go back a second time, but you're more selective about where it hits. The Mephiston red stacking on itself will make it more vibrant, will make it appear lighter. And then if you do that with the next step up, maybe even slightly diluted, you'll get an almost perfect blend, I think. Anyway, so that's the theory. So I'm thinking about trying it out. I've got camera equipment now, so I'm planning on recording that process and then figuring out how to edit, because this old guy hasn't done much video editing.
Yeah.
So that'll be new. But excited to try new stuff like that.
So look out for on our YouTube channel when we get that done. That is at First Turn Gaming on YouTube. Mm-hmm. So we'll get some videos up there. If you've seen our channel before, we post copies of all of these podcast episodes there as well in an audio format, stock photo kind of form. But we've got some interviews there that we'll be posting that are actual visual videos.
Yep.
And more is to come as we kind of ramp up and do some
hobby
show
content.
You these things as opposed to just talking about them.
Yeah, it's time. So speaking of cider, I say as I consume or don't consume a cider. We saw for Gen Con, which isn't a miniatures event necessarily.
It's still miniatures adjacent. Like it's enough.
But it's a tabletop.
Yeah, it's enough of a similar event that we included as one of the main tabletop events of the year.
And we attend it most years, and it's tabletop gaming. But they just announced the Sun King Brewery beer.
Yep, that they do every year. They've got one. They had a vote for it over the last couple of weeks of which ones they're going to have and make available. Only for the event, only for that limited run. You can't get it outside of it.
Well, and every year the three beers they show, I'll be honest, I'm not a beer aficionado. I don't know that much about beer. I haven't always liked beer. So they do the vote every year, and there's usually one out of the three that I'm like, that's the only one that sounds good to me.
Right.
And then we've had hits, we've had misses, we've had shrug. This year, all three that they showed, I was like, I'd have any one of those. Mm-hmm. Those three flavors they picked were great. The one that won was the apple cider, which is a cider beer hybrid. I guess a cider's kind of a beer.
So it's all about method, right? I mean, places have done this for a while now, where they brew apple cider kind of things in different methods. Mm-hmm. You've got really dry, like champagne ciders, lager style ciders. You've got all kinds of different stuff, right?
And you've got from the hyper sweet to the hyper tart to the
right. Yeah. And so if you brew a cider like a beer, you get a different thing. So I'm sure this one will be fine. It might even be great.
Maybe.
We've been kind of on a kick lately with Strongbow, one of the
Really dig their
the
ciders.
golden apple one specifically is nice. It's like the right mix of like tart and sweet and crisp and refreshing, to the point where it's like we're thinking about things to have and we're like, let's go with that one.
Let's get that too.
Safe.
Yeah.
So like I've been a real cider kick. So it's will hopefully be pretty.
I hope we're not sick
exciting.
of it before we get there. That'll be
yeah. So we'll see. But it's cool that that's the one that was voted for and that's the one that won this year. Because like I said, all three of them sounded good. This is the one I think I was most interested in trying. So it'd be nice, and especially if it's like ice cold at the convention, it just knocks it up an extra little notch.
Yeah, the other options were a butterscotch brown, which is a creamy, sweet, and malty flavor with prominent butterscotch notes.
Yep.
And then they said potentially nutty or toasty undertones. Although I never pick up on that, my palate's maybe not. The third option was a dark Czech lager, amber, dark brown. I do like ambers, so that would have been the thing. Is I read all three of those and was like,
exactly.
whatever.
It's like, I don't care which one wins. Yeah. This is one I'm most interested in, but all three of them will be great.
And for anyone who's been to Gen Con, the block party, which is outdoors between the convention center and the Lucas Oil Stadium where the Colts play, the tent that serves them, the Sun King Brewery tent, the beer is always just painfully but perfectly ice cold. So which makes it better. Yeah, it unquestionably makes it better.
And if you ever thought or you heard about Gen Con and always thought about going but didn't know, go. Like it's a little bit expensive of a trip because the ticket price is a little high for not getting much.
And everything downtown's pricey.
It's so much fun. It is a good time.
And even if you
recommend it.
And here's the thing: if you're just into miniatures and you're not sure that this is when you'd go to, you're in the summer, you're in the downtown of a city. There's tons to do. Treat it like a vacation. And then, if you got to get your miniature fix in, there are demos and tournaments that go on the whole 4 days.
Yeah, I mean, even though it's not a miniatures event,
right?
There's still basically, if you ever heard of an RTT, that's a
3-round one day.
It's a 3-round 1 day event, right? You're not qualifying for anything. You're not, big tournament points or whatever. It's a for fun practice, low stakes, whatever, short tournament. Show up for 1 day and play a few games, demo some games. There's events for paint and takes. There are one of the cool ones that we wanted to get into, which I don't think we've even looked at the event list really, because we're just going.
Well, it's May 18th, I think we get the event list. Yeah.
There's usually show up, get handed a team for a
Blood Bowl
type of game, and then play with it and keep it. I love that idea where it's there's low commitment for me to paint stuff and bring it to the event with me and to worry about things breaking or list building or anything. Here, you get there, you're handed a thing, and you just use it. I love that idea.
Yeah, and that puts everybody on similar playing field too, no pun intended, because now it's not someone has tailored and tuned a list. You show up, you get handed an assembled team from a box, play. And they do, so there's a number of things like that. So even if the Warhammer universes aren't your thing, there's Battletech games that go on like that the whole time.
Yeah, there's pretty much 100% of the
I know
event,
MCP's got a big event there.
That. Yep.
Yeah. There's Star Wars.
And there's so many cool formats for MCP that allows for more interesting versions of play. Star Wars always runs it, and there's now not only the large scale game for Star Wars, but there's also the
Shatterpoint,
Shatterpoint, which is gaining some traction. War Machine Mark IV, Mark III, Mark IV is in full production.
Yep. I do wonder. Side note about the Star Wars one, is so when it was Final what was the company? Before that.
Final Fantasy Flight.
Fantasy Flight.
Yeah, okay.
When that company was running it, they had a history of cannibalizing their own games.
Right.
Where it was like, here's Armada. Nope, we're going to cannibalize with Imperial Assault. Here's X-Wing, cannibalizes both of them. And then it was like, here's Legion, gets rid of X-Wing. And now here's Shatterpoint, Legion's starting to fade. So, but now it's under Asmodee or Atomic Mass.
Asmodee, I think.
It's under one of those companies now, and so we thought that might change, but I feel like Shatterpoint's starting to overtake Legion. So Star Wars universe has a history of just kind of eating their own games.
Yeah.
Anyway, whichever one you play, it'll be there.
Yep.
Now, and if you're into card games, well, Magic the Gathering runs massive tournaments the entire time at Gen Con. Qualifiers for stuff, fun events for stuff, maybe high-risk ones where there's draft and alpha thing if you get into the top 8. And then I know Star Wars Unlimited's got a big event there. Yeah. So
Last year, I don't know if it's still going to happen, but Disney's card game, Lorcana, had a really big representation there. They had boxes for sale that was before the new set was even available, kind of thing. This is usually the place where new stuff debuts.
It is.
Honestly. Like this, because it is a bigger event overall than like Adepticon is.
It's massive.
And so, but it's focused on other stuff really than miniatures, even though the miniature stuff, almost all of it, will still be there.
And the miniature sector is growing, because I remember when they went up to like stall 2,800 in the vendor side, and then they expanded. They like knocked down that other wall, and now it goes over 3,000s, and a lot of it's miniatures. And then if you're into anything else, if you like to indulge in the books, like the novels around these series, or the artwork, all those people are there. If you like accessories for your role-playing games, there are dice and props and tabletop goodies for every role-playing system. And then if you're into cosplay, show up and be a nerd. There's a costume parade. It's such a cool event to do all things nerd.
It's almost hard to see it all in those three or 4 days that you're there.
I mean, if you go there laser focused, you'll be bored, I suppose, but you'll be like that anywhere. But it's hard to see it all if you have a general interest in all of these games and hobbies. So, absolutely dig it. We're excited.
At the end of July this year.
Yeah, it goes from like the 31st to the August 2nd or 3rd.
Yeah. So right square in the middle of summer, sandwiched between lots of other events throughout the summer too. So it's getting pretty crowded when you think about
August, September, October, November is all big now.
When you think about trying to go to like multiple events, it's like they're all stacked now. They're right back to back.
It's weird they skip. It's funny. It's like April, May, June, nothing except for like a U.S. Open, which you have to be qualified, I think, to play those, don't you? Or you have to sign up at a certain time.
Yeah.
But those are specifically Warhammer. For these more generalized cons, it's like you go from Adepticon in March and you're waiting, if you're just looking for miniatures, you're either going to ReaperCon or Nova, late August, early September. That's quite a gap.
Yeah.
But then they're hitting you with, if you consider Gen Con one of them, you go Gen Con, ReaperCon, Nova, now LVO's October, and then World Championships. It's like that's a lot of ask for these. If you're a tournament player, that's a big ask. If you're trying to, get a lot of ITC points or whatever, if that's your thing. But anyway, on the hobby side, we were talking about the hacks. Yeah. And we're excited to employ. Do you have any you're planning on trying? Now we're no longer New Year. I mean, we're almost in May.
Yeah. I really like the worn effect that very selective dry brushing and stippling does because that's my kick right now is like old armor, right? Like brand and shiny new armor it's just not exciting to me. Like the heavy metal stuff, like having a
crisp, clean,
factory
right.
fresh whatever out of a I like weathering. I like old. I like.
Surprised you haven't given the oil washes a crack. Then,
I have a bunch. I just haven't used them more. I did use some of them to do some of my kind of grungy shading. So I really like when you start kind of darkening down a surface using a kind of a neutral gray to really create those like smoky shadows. That not just make the color darker, but I actually want it to be like dusty and dirty. I'm using some of the oil washes for that, and it's really effective.
And I've still liked the only ones that I am familiar with, but the AK enamel washes have also been really good.
Yeah.
Because you can do a lot with that.
But, you can do with any of them, though. That's the thing. Yeah. Is it's for the effect that I'm trying to come up with, the enamel washes, the oil washes, and
contrast paints.
They all kind of can do the same thing as you very lightly coat a surface with a thin layer and you layer it into the shadow. It's that kind of thing. The benefit of the low tension ones or the low surface area high.
It's low surface tension.
Low surface tension, high. What is it? Adhesion.
Oh yeah, something
kind
like
that quality where it slurps itself into the cracks.
Yep.
Where you like touch a crack and it expands.
That capillary action. Yeah.
And it expands throughout the entire recess. Is really cool when you're trying to do like hard shadow lines.
Pin washing.
But it's almost a detriment when you use an oil wash that wants to do that naturally when you do want to darken a surface.
So So one thing I saw someone do, a couple of people did this actually, is so the oil wash can do that for you if you leave it thicker.
Okay.
And so it'll freak you out when you first do it because it'll go on like mud. And So it'll still do enough capillary action to settle in all the recesses, but it'll tint your whole model, whatever that oil paint was, and you're like, oh no,
but I don't.
Did I destroy it?
Cleanup part of it. That's my thing.
You wait like 30 minutes. You go grab a wedge, like a makeup wedge sponge. You can use Q-tips. You just risk fibers being left behind. So I've got two things. I've got the little makeup wedges, which you can find at the dollar store. And then I've also got these ones that have a long stick with a bud, but it's a sponge still. And then you don't even need the mineral spirits. You can just start cleaning. You'll go through some of them, but it'll do that where it'll clean the surface, but it's ever so slightly tinted. And then it will still leave a gradient into those shadows. And it really, for grimdark old look, it is really nice. Where I found it wasn't as effective was in like super detailed, dense surfaces or fabric. Yeah. I've not seen anyone do the oil wash on fabric that looks good. So you just kind of skip that and do it a normal way, or with a contrast paint or whatever.
Because like with fabric, you kind of are doing a lot of freehands to sell the effect. I mean, the most effective fabric I've seen is where you're not creating nice smooth surfaces unless it's crushed velvet or something. You know, like most fabrics have visible fiber in them. You know,
yeah,
so you kind of like replicate that.
And the oil wash on them, the problem I've seen is like a stained look on the fabric isn't great on a miniature, and so it works great for armor and shields and crevices, but like on the fabric it just looks a little weird because it settles in the folds and you're trying to create two planes of light, and so I would just skip it on big fabric. But on everything else, absolutely. And I think if you're going for an old, weathered, worn, that'll just be practice, but I think you can get the effect you want pretty simply.
And so I've been doing it with just like heavy dry brushing, which could absolutely be replaced with the sponge to see if my only hesitancy is it's mid-army, and so I don't want to change
two radical styles.
Change methods too quickly. But it's like I think I'd be trying it on my death rattle stuff, which is basically being retired.
Yeah.
My old stuff is being retired anyway, so I might on the new stuff.
You know what's interesting is I think most hobbyists who have armies for games have had that happen where partway through an army, if they didn't get it all painted at once, change either a technique they use, change a style they use, maybe even change brands of paint.
Or the scheme entirely.
Yeah. And all of a sudden it feels like when Games Workshop releases a Codex or Battletome halfway through an edition, you can tell their design philosophy changed. That's what it feels like. And so it's like, whoa, this feels like a way different game with these armies compared to and it feels like that with your paint scheme where it's like, well, I was doing it this way, but now I found a much more efficient way, but the color looks slightly different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I ran out of a color and I go to buy it again and the formula's changed.
Yeah.
That happens sometimes.
Or even you found a step you can skip, and so it does change the effect overall.
Or, to come up with your original plan, you did some extra steps.
Yep.
Because you were trying
to figure it out. A little more careful,
yeah. And now it's like I've locked it in. I can skip this step, but then maybe skipping that step doesn't create the exact same effect.
Yep.
Like the trials and the ebb and flow of the method that you were trying initially did create an effect that you didn't replicate by doing it more cleanly.
Mm-hmm.
I've had that happen.
Yep.
So, yep. Like when you skip the red in your orc skin. Like it just.
Red in the orc skin, huh?
Yeah, base coating my orcs in red, and then having that sub layer of the skin that is still flesh and blood. Even though you're green skinned, you still kind of have that green in the shadows to replicate the fact that you're a living thing.
Yeah, you can't.
That's one of my biggest gripes with like green orcs in most of the like paint schemes that you have in even in box art. It's like these green guys are too green. Like they're not. There's none of that warmth in there. There's no, like.
And as far as we know, they're not cold-blooded, right? They're
exactly right. So there should be like tans and pinks and stuff in there as well. Like, do you paint the palms of your orcs green? I don't. I paint them kind of pinkish,
right?
Because that's like
I've seen that a lot, and it looks good.
The sections of the skin where, like, if you consider the green as like a melanin, a pigmentation of the skin as opposed to like, well, you're just green.
Yeah.
You treat it like actual skin tone. You use more colors, pinks and red.
Yep.
That kind of thing. Red plus like normal paint roots for skin. Lots of like Bugman's Glow is a great like middle.
But you'll notice if you halfway through an army skip that. Skipping steps in painting. I mean, it's just like with baking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, well,
I never let my bread rise, and it never turns out well.
Never turns out. Like, in cooking, it's a little more free form. Like baking's rocket science. I mean, you can't skip steps. You can't. There's a science to how stuff turns from liquid into a solid, and got to do it just right.
Pockets of gas that are necessary, all that shit. Yeah,
delicious though.
I know. Bread with a nice crispy crunch. A nice French bread loaf.
Well, it's the sound. Yeah. Wasn't that Ratatouille?
Yeah,
that's how you know good bread.
It's real though. That's a real thing. You can tell good bread, but you break it up and you smell that like I love a good sourdough.
The yeast.
Yeah, the yeasty kind of you know. Oh, that tangy. Oh, it's so good. There is something to it.
There is.
So, and I've never been able to bake anything but cookies.
I'm not one of those who
muffins,
has a sourdough starter just hanging around. I don't.
I think that's disgusting. If you have a sourdough starter just hanging around, what is wrong with you? Oh yeah, I just got a jar of mold that I just mix into some flour.
And I take a bit that I make another one off of.
Every once in a while, it's like.
And then I culture it so it's never ending.
It's disgusting.
Oh, it's gray and green.
Oh,
that's
right.
normal.
Just mix in some buttermilk into bread and you'll be fine. It's good enough. Honestly, there are some sourdough hacks that you can do.
Oh, sure.
Cheat out the funkiness of sourdough.
Otherwise, it's like
you don't literally.
Oh, you have a jar of green gray mold goop in your kitchen at all times.
That is wild to me. That you just
and you make other ones off of it,
and it's just your pet. You feed it and nurture it.
That way it grows. Yep.
It's bizarre. It's so
and then you
weird.
take a small chunk and use it for your next bread loaf. Yeah. Mm-mm. I'm sure it's whatever.
Yeah. The mother dough or whatever you call it. The concept is disgusting. Something with
from
cheese,
Charles, what's his name?
Yeah, something with Boyle.
Boyle from Brooklyn and all the way to John 100%. Favreau has. I
mean, it's like the same thing with cheese, though, right? I love cheese. I love cheese. Cheese is one of the best human inventions of all time. But some cheese is nasty.
Some of it's
gross. When you have visible color veins within the cheese, it's like you shouldn't be eating this.
And it's not because something else was mixed in.
Right.
Yeah.
Blue cheese, it's just that is funky. Who thought of that? That's disgusting. No. Sorry. I like blue cheese, and I'll eat it in things, but it's the first bold individual to be not only try it, but then eat it and be wait, guys.
Wait till you try this.
Actually, this is good. I know you tried it and it tastes like vomit, but hold on.
And I know you smelled it when I was down the street.
Good, and I'll tell you why. It's how did you sell people on that?
Yep.
That's insane to me. Yep. But speaking of bread and cheese, I could definitely.
We could be French. Yeah. A little bread and cheese.
Oui. Let's eat.
Thanks for joining. We hope you enjoyed. Follow us for more of our weekly episodes on YouTube Podcasts, Spotify, and Podbean. You can follow myself and Llama on Instagram. We are at Llama Paints Minis and Hyena Paints Minis. Music provided by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. And as always, we'll catch you next time.